Welcome, everyone. Today is May 28th, 2020. Thank you for joining us for our webinar called Regional Priorities for a Connected Learn and Work Ecosystem, Results from the Midwestern Credential Transparency Survey. Just a reminder, today's webinar will be recorded, and so you will be able to access it afterwards, and it will come to you in the, attached to an email. With that email, there will also be a survey we would like you to complete so that we know how we're doing, and you can let us know about other ideas that would be helpful for future webinars. We ask that you hold all your questions or submit them in the chat box. It's actually not a chat, it says questions. There's a specific little place in your control panel to the right on your screen, and that is where you can enter questions throughout the time of the webinar. There will be a question and answer section at the end. So we'll be happy to answer as many of your questions as we can along the way and at that time. So I am going to ask now, one more thing. Most of you want to know if you're going to be able to access the slides from the webinar. If you actually go down on your right side in your control panel, all the way down to the bottom, you're going to see a place for an attachment where there are some documents attached. Those are actually the slides that we're using today. So welcome, and I will ask Everett, our technical support person today, to go ahead and advance to the next slide. That's me. Once again, thank you for joining us. Next. I'm going to introduce our presenters. We have Scott Cheney, Credential Engine's Executive Director, Jeff Grann, Credential Engine's Principal Investigator. We have Marcia Black-Watson from the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. And then we have Ken Sauer from the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. We are going to start this webinar today just with a quick poll question. So again, taking a look at your control panel over on the right side of your screen, you're going to be able to answer this little question we have for you. The question is, how familiar are you with the concept of credential transparency? Your options are not familiar at all, heard or read something about it once, very familiar, and monitor Credential Engine's developments. I'm actively engaged in advancing credential transparency. If you can all just give us a quick response, then we're going to be able to figure out where our audience is so that we can make sure we're tailoring all of our comments and the information we provide accordingly. How are we doing, Everett? How many responses do we have now?
We've got about 40% in, so
let's give you guys
those of you who are waiting to, really beat the buzzer, now's your time.
Thank you. I know it also takes
10 more seconds.
Yep. All right.
All right.
Let's see our results. All right. It looks like we have a mix as we would expect. About 9% are not familiar at all. So you're in the right place. You're going to learn about these things today. You've heard or read something about it. 36%, you're also in the right place. I'm very familiar and I monitor Credential Engine's developments. That's great. You're going to get a nice update today. And I'm actively engaged in advancing credential transparency. And you're, again, also in the right place because you're going to begin to learn a lot more about what the next steps are for Credential Engine and for the collaboration with MHEC. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Scott Cheney.
Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate that very much. Pleasure to be with you all today. As Jenny said, my name is Scott Cheney, and I'm the Executive Director here at Credential Engine. And I will move through a few updates about our work and a little bit of background about who we are, and then we can dive into some of the meat of the survey that was done recently. So Everett, if we could move to the first slide, thank you. Just very quickly about who we are. We are a community-based nonprofit organization. We like to think of ourselves as a public service organization, and our entire mission is built around bringing credential transparency to the marketplace. Now, what do we mean by credential transparency, and how do we do it? Credential transparency is really the idea that anyone, anytime, anywhere could have immediate access to current, accurate, and up-to-date information and comprehensive information about credentials in the marketplace, their competencies, their connections to other credentials, so pathways between credentials and jobs, labor market outcomes, quality assurance information, and other pieces of data that will really help individuals make more informed decisions. We do that through providing common infrastructures and common language or common schema by having publishing tools and data tools to support making all of this accessible, and then to making the data open for use by states and vendors. So Google Pathways uses some of our data in some of their state tools, in Indiana especially. The state of New Jersey uses it as part of pathway tools, the state of Washington as well. So making sure that the data is open and accessible and then publicly used in open applications. So we can move to the next slide and point out that the reason that we're doing this work is because the marketplace is incredibly confusing and only getting more so. We produced a report just last year that was a count of all credentials in the US marketplace. And when we talk about credentials, we are referring to everything that is intended to support an individual's ability to convey what they know and can do, both for further education as well as for employment. So with that, we consider everything from a diploma, a degree, a license, a badge, a certificate, an apprenticeship, a certification, and that counts up to somewhere about 738,000 just last year. And we know already, as we're producing our report for this year, that the number of some of those types of credentials has grown dramatically. Badges, for instance, have grown. And we suspect that given current circumstances, that other certificates and maybe degrees will begin to decline as we see an impact. All of this means that workers and employers are constantly trying to navigate a very confusing marketplace with a lot of information and trying to make the best decisions about their pathways. And so our job is to try and bring all of that information to light and to have it be open and accessible so that people can make more informed decisions. We think that there's about 40,000 different providers. Again, that number is about to change significantly, but there's about 40,000 different providers issuing credentials in the United States alone. So just another indicator about how complex and confusing this marketplace is. And we can move to the next slide. Very quickly, just to give you a quick idea of the categories of credentials that we count, and there's a link to the report itself on our website, but we won't spend a lot more time on this one. So we can move to the next slide. We do a lot of this work by having the use of common schema or common descriptive languages. And a good analogy is if we look at the map here in the middle, you might think about a Waze tool or a Google Maps tool or an Apple Maps. And the fact that you can have those kind of tools available on the web is because all of the underlying data about the highways and the stop signs and the speed limits and traffic and accidents is designed and shared and made accessible through common languages, common descriptive languages. We're doing the same thing with credentials and competencies. And as a result, we're able to collect a large amount of information and share it in very easily to digest ways. This information, this particular example, is from the Ivy Tech Community Colleges in Indiana. It's a certificate of pharmacy technician. And you can see, just as an example, some of the kinds of data that can be shared and then compared to similar credentials across different types of providers. There's on the left here the credential type, a little bit of information about it, audience levels, subjects that it relates to, occupations and industries. You can see on the left buttons that you can click into to look at the specific competencies. You can look at the connections between credentials, what leads to another, quality assurance, any requirements or recommendations that have to be met in order to earn this credential. And all of this information is, by each data point, searchable, and you can build tools that will let you understand just healthcare, just pathways, just information about credentials leading to certain occupations and industries. And Indiana, as Ken will tell you a little bit later, is using this data very creatively in trying to build new sets of tools for workers and students and employers alike. And we can move on to the next slide. The work we're doing is by itself very important. It's very foundational to improving the work and learn ecosystem in the United States, but it's one piece. It's a first piece of a larger set of work that has to be done. This is essentially a guide that Lumina Foundation, which was one of our early funders, has put together to try and help map out a number of different initiatives that are taking place around the country that are all contributing to this improved work and learn ecosystem. And you can see in the upper left-hand quadrant here, they've identified the need to have full credential transparency as the most important and the first step in this entire process. There's a lot that grows from it. There's a lot that it relates to, and it all loops back around to having richer transparency about richer data sets around credentials and competencies, ideally then connected to the skills and requirements of employers so that you can have that thorough end-to-end picture of what needs to be gotten from an employer, or excuse me, from a provider to an employer, and you can then plug in what an individual has along that pathway so they can understand what else they need to obtain. We can move to the next slide, give you an idea of the kind of work, the places that we're doing this work. We've always felt that states have been an essential partner given their role in not only providing education, their role in overseeing lots of state and federal money around workforce development, and also their role in making sure that there are quality assurances and eligibility lists and standards set for what credentials can be provided and which ones meet certain requirements to receive funding. And then on the backside of making sure that students are getting the kind of guidance counseling and career exploration services, that employers are getting information about what's being offered so that employers can make decisions about expanding or relocating. So states have been one of our key partners. You can see from this map that 6 of the 12 states that are in the MHEC membership region have already been doing work with us, and we are looking forward to the opportunity to work with the other 6 states and to deepen our work in the first 6 as we are pursuing a National Science Foundation grant, which has been the root of a lot of our work in the Midwest of late. We can move on to the next slide. Just to give you an idea about some of the work we're doing recently, we have just received a grant from the National Science Foundation specifically related to response to the COVID-19 crisis. We're putting actually a lot of that money into the New York State region, partnering with some players in New York State to publish credential and competency information primarily around healthcare credentials so that we can support people finding the right credentials to be able to get jobs and fill critical needs in the New York healthcare system, but also to help employers understand what competencies are embedded inside of credentials and being able to signal how well those actually meet the needs of the employer, oftentimes with different skill requirements coming up as a result of COVID. And then finally, helping individuals be able to understand what skill gaps they have and where best they can go get those skills in order to round out their credentials in order to be eligible for those jobs. We're talking to a number of other states as well, Alabama in particular, about how we can be supportive of their work in responding to COVID. I'll not touch on these other 2 bullets today, just in the interest of time. We can move to the next slide, and I'll focus especially on the 3rd bullet here, the emerging work around interoperable learning records, or what have been also known as comprehensive learner records. Slight variations on the 2, but we're focusing on this one because there are 2 grant opportunities that are coming out from the U.S. Department of Education. One had been the Reimagining K-12 grants, and an upcoming one will be the Reimagining Workforce grants, both of which now include language related to publishing information in open schema and as linked data formats that are compatible with interoperable learning records. So we're seeing not just interest among the states, not just interest among companies like Google and having access to this information, but we're now beginning to see a real federal recognition of the value of this data and why it's of value to workers trying to find their way back into employment in this economy, as well as to educators being able to more clearly signal what they're offering. And so they're beginning to build that into some of the grant opportunities, first through CARES, but we're getting very clear signals that this is going to be something that is going to be seen in more federal grant opportunities. And the work that we're doing with our open schema and the credential registry certainly meet the standards for linked data and open schema as part of this kind of work. So we're doing a lot of work right now around that space. Happy to answer any other questions about these other bullets, but again, in the interest of time, I wanted to just move along and talk quickly about two new initiatives that we have up and running. The first is this state policy partnership. We've been working with those 16 or 17 states that were highlighted on the map about publishing information to the registry and using it. We're now working with these partners in order to support advancing state policy that will make credential transparency an enduring part of states' commitment to open data. So that work is just getting underway, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more about it, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to your states about ways that we can support appropriate policy mechanisms to do this work. And then we can move on. And the other partnership that I wanted to point out is this relationship that was led by ACE, ACRO, and EDUCAUSE to bring together a number of national higher ed associations who are endorsing and supporting the work of Credential Engine and recognizing the value of credential transparency. And we really appreciate their support, and we've been working with them to help educate their members about the value of this work. And then I'll close out on this last slide, which is just a few notes about our work and about us, because they almost always come up, and so I like to just address them proactively. As I said, we are a public service nonprofit. We do not have a fee base for publishing data. We believe that this data is in the public good, and so we want to make sure we're doing everything possible to ensure that organizations can publish data without a fee. There is no fee for non-commercial use of the data, so we'll never turn someone away who is low income, who needs the information to make better decisions and being able to access this information. The language that we use, the open schema, are Creative Commons licensed. We don't own them. They are open, and we encourage anyone to use them. We do not define quality. We work with states and accreditors and others to publish information about how they define quality, but we are not a separate quality assurance body. We just make sure that that information is accessible in open formats. And then we do not track or in any way collect information about individuals, just the credentials and the competencies that they would have, but not their instance of actually having it. So with that said, hopefully that was a good overview and update for people. And I'll turn it back to Jenny to move on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Scott. All right, our next speaker is Jeff Grann, Principal Investigator at Credential Engine. Hi, welcome, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Hey, everyone, glad to join you. I'm going to share with you some context about the survey and the results. And I wanted to start with our work with the National Science Foundation and their new Convergence Accelerator program. This is a new capability from the National Science Foundation, which is focused on use-inspired research. These are areas of national importance that often fall in between the different directorates of NSF. And so it's a new mechanism. One of the key pieces of Convergence Accelerator has been developing public-private partnerships. And so to that extent, we've have later on the call, Ken Sauer, he's the co-principal investigator with me on this grant. And we also have been working with MHEC in phase 1 and intend to do so in phase 2, and I can talk a little more about that as well. And then we've also benefited from having Holly with the Lumina Foundation on the team. The work was pretty straightforward. We ended up hosting 3 different workshops and interviewing about 20 or 30 different people across the state of Indiana in phase 1, basically exploring opportunities to connect credential data for a variety of use cases like digital records, like ETPL lists, like career exploration tools, a whole host of different things. And what we found is that many people were very excited about this work and they saw the connection, and yet also admitted they're pursuing those use cases individually within one agency, with one partner. And we felt like phase 2, our proposal could help build a community of practice where those use cases could collaborate and work together to make quicker progress, especially on the credential transparency component of all of those use cases. And so that's our plans for phase 2, but we wanted to learn more through the survey. And so on the next slide, I just give you an overview of what the survey was about. It was really quick. Data were collected for about a week and a half, and we focused on 3 different areas that we thought would be important for our understanding of how to have a successful phase 2 proposal. That was alignment to state priorities. We wanted to make sure we knew how credential transparency is being perceived within each of the states, Midwest states. We also wanted to know who's involved, who the stakeholders were, and so we have questions about that. And then because it's a distributed and large group of people, we wanted to know more about any effective strategies for engaging folks at a distance. We went to the commissioners directly and the alternates, as well as some select credential engine partners from those 6 Midwest states that Scott mentioned. And then we got a great response. We got 26 responses, which we were really proud of. Many are already involved, are from state government agencies, some credential providers, and then there is actually a broad mix of different groups that are involved in credential data. And so that was representative, as well as getting responses from each of the 12 Midwest states. So we were happy with that. Let's look at the results. On the next slide, we summarize the findings relative to state priorities. We asked about these 9 different areas. Many of them are, as you can see, a current focal point for states. There's a lot of different high priority use cases that states are pursuing. And on the next slide, I just summarize this for everyone that basically the top opportunities here are around career, using credentials to help people advance their career, and also ensuring the citizens of states obtain credentials. So that we characterize that as performance. You know, to what extent are people earning high school diplomas? Are they earning the bachelor's degrees that they're enrolled in? All of those kind of metrics that are very important, foundational, really. And then we also just called out that the 2 opportunities here for future use cases are around ROI, how effective are particular credential providers in providing value, and also how are these credentials being designed and aligned to the workforce needs. So that's kind of captured here under the broad term competencies. And so we'll want to learn more about that through phase 2. On the next slide, we've got information about the different people that are already involved in the different stakeholder groups, already involved in advancing those priorities. It's a long list. There are 12 different stakeholder groups that we winnowed down. Initially we had about 22, and we were like, we got to get down to something reasonable. But I summarize it here on the next piece for everyone. Basically, as you might expect, state agencies play a vital, central, key role in advancing credential transparency, and many are already working on this in different ways and to different degrees. And also, the post-secondary college university leadership are often aware of the importance of credential transparency to their work. A couple key groups not really consistently engaged across the states were HR folks. Human resource professionals play a key role in interpreting the resumes and applicants for jobs, and they could be, I think, engaged effectively to help us, as well as the role of faculty. When we talk about competencies and assessments and curriculum, faculty play a vital role in developing the currency of those credentials. So they can be involved as well as registrars. Registrars play a vital role in knitting together often many different data systems and providing consistent, reliable information to the public about the offerings of the university and colleges. So those are some of the insights we took away from the results. And we'll look at the next slide. And I apologize, just running along kind of quickly here. The results are, and these tables are in the handout. So I'd encourage you to drill in and kind of happy to field any questions. But the third area here is around engagement strategies, and just knowing, actually we did this in April, so I think the COVID thing was on people's minds, but now more so than ever. So the idea of having large face-to-face meetings was relatively low, and I think has slipped even lower as not being a very effective strategy. But the good news was that actually action team, we'll look at the next slide here, just to summarize it. Small web meetings seem to work well, and action teams that were kind of topical, focused on particular areas can be effective in moving this work forward. So we'll be leaning into those as we begin to plan our phase 2 work that have proposed, but award decisions aren't until August. So that's kind of the timeline as far as we know. Just to close it out on the next slide, we did have one kind of final question, just given what you know and what you understand of credential transparency, are you interested in working with MHEC and Credential Engine and maybe other national partners in pursuing it? We got a strong response. 95% said yes. That was fantastic. And I think what we'd like to do is just open it up here, knowing we got a mixed group, we'd love to have another poll question. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah. I'll let you run the poll for us.
Everett, can you give us, oops. And so question number 2 is, are you interested in working with MHEC, Credential Engine, and others to help advance credential transparency in your state? And your options are yes, no, and I don't know. So we will give you a moment to respond. Everett, how are we doing?
We're getting around 30%. So if anyone has yet to respond, really mulling over their response, just throw one out there.
I hope everyone is able to find the portion of their control panel that says polls and to respond accordingly. All right, why don't we see our results?
All right.
Well, Jeff, it looks like I'll let you interpret those.
Yeah, well, I think it's fantastic. I mean, we've definitely got a mixed audience here. Some folks we know are already working on this, so that's fantastic. And others keeping an open mind to it. We're hoping to share more and more information, including some 2 additional webinars next week. So if you would like to learn more, I just encourage folks to come to those as well.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. All right, now we're going to hear from Marcia. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be joining you. I'm from Michigan and to speak about our credential transparency work and our partnership with Credential Engine. So again, I am Marcia Black-Watson. I am Industry Engagement Director for the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. That is the state umbrella that includes public employment and training, specifically workforce development. I work very closely with employers to ensure that they have the skilled talent that they need to grow and thrive in the state of Michigan. Certainly my representation on the webinar today does not really include all of the partners that we have as a part of our Credential Engine partnership. We work very closely with our Office of Information Systems for Talent and Workforce Development, with our Department of Technology Management and Budget, responsible for labor market information and other educational performance information, our Department of Education, as well as our Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. So those are our partners in the state of Michigan. If you go to the next slide, certainly the opportunity that Credential Engine has presented to the state of Michigan really aligns very well with the survey results that you just heard from Jeff. And our state's strategic focus for the last few years has really been around the skill gaps that we have been experiencing across our priority industries, including agriculture, including advanced manufacturing, construction, energy, healthcare, information technology, and mobility. And solutions that we have employed are many, but some primary solutions really focus on career awareness and career exploration related to those high demand career opportunities and the career pathways that really lead individuals, job seekers, and students to those opportunities. Last year, our governor, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, set a higher education credential attainment goal to increase the number of working age adults in the state of Michigan that have post-secondary credentials and certificates and college degrees from 45%, which is relatively low in comparison to other states, to 60% by 2030. And so certainly our Credential Engine partnership is a great asset to that work about connecting training programs with certifications, evaluating those credentials to the extent that they are industry recognized and comparing them to the criteria for the value to industry, and unifying the terms really across education, across workforce, and other stakeholders. On the next slide, you'll see that while there are so many opportunities in engaging in this work, Michigan had to pick 3, and because I was the principal for our proposal to Credential Engine, we ended up with these 3, expanding registered apprenticeships in Michigan, which is really a great part of the work that I do. And we saw this as an opportunity to not only make the public aware of the many apprenticeship programs that we have in our state. We are one of the nation's leaders in current registered apprentices and apprenticeship programs, but to also dig a little deeper into those programs to identify those embedded credentials, which will help identify benchmarks, steps along the way, because oftentimes these are longer training programs, but then to also to create some career latticed apprenticeships based on the information that we really learn through our Credential Engine work. We also see this as an opportunity and have a business case that's around enhancing our public workforce information systems. Certainly our public employment and training, labor exchange, Pure Michigan Talent Connect, our career education, career platform that's around exploration, which we call Pathfinder, our eligible training provider list, the Training Connect, as well as our participant and performance tracking system. We call it OSMIS, One Stop Management Information System. We see this as a real opportunity to enhance these platforms that the public has access to. And while we have a number of certifications and credentials that are a part of those platforms, we have learned that there's not common language around them, and oftentimes they're referred to differently across those systems. But then also to include a plethora of certifications and credentials that are not included in those systems. So a great opportunity. And then once we have identified a significant number of credentials across the state of Michigan, then we will begin to really articulate, draw out, document pathways, so to make that more transparent for job seekers and students. And we really believe that once there's a clear understanding about how individuals can get to those career opportunities really that are going unfilled, it's going to be a great benefit for Michigan. And then closing out on the next slide, I just want to give you a brief project status. We started this work in July of 2018, and next you're going to hear from Ken from Indiana, who was the first state to adopt this credential engine work and establish a partnership. While we're not as far along as Indiana, we have made some great progress that we are really, really excited about. Our asset mapping for this work has been so enlightening. There have been significant learnings regarding credential sponsors and the crucial role really that our state government partners play in providing articulated and transparent career pathways. While all of the partners that we've spoken to as a part of our asset mapping have seen the value to this work, and they have many business cases that they can apply, we have discovered that we needed to use a phased approach. So we're working very closely with our state government partners as we are really mapping out how we are going to publish our credentials and the emphasis that we have on certain licensure and credentials, and particularly those ones that are with state government. So we're starting with our most intimate partners first, and we know that they will be forgiving as we use them as guinea pigs to do this work. And then we've also taken this opportunity in our learnings from our asset mapping to structure our staffing. And one of the things that we're excited about is that we have full-time staff. We have a number of individuals that work on this as a partnership, but we have a full-time staffer who we were able to write into our Workforce Data Quality Initiative grant. It's the third one that we've been able to secure. And so we have someone who is positioned to work with our partners to help with publishing to the registry. And we have really designed a publishing protocol that is technical assistance rich. And I think that our partners here in the state of Michigan really appreciate. So with this, the final part is the technology, and we're working on building our application programming interface, or API, that will help with efficient download of high volumes of credentials. And we have about 6,900 credentials that are waiting in the queue for that technology to be completed. COVID-19 has actually put a little delay into that work, about 2 to 3 months, but it is coming down the line, and we will see a more significant process once that is completed. So with that, I'll wrap up and turn it back to Jenny. If you have any questions for me, I'll be here to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcia. And I'll just say what I said on Tuesday. You guys have done a lot in a very short amount of time. It's very impressive. All right, well, we're going to move on now to hear from Ken Sauer from the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. Welcome, Ken.
Hey, thank you, Jenny. As Jenny indicated, I'm with the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, Senior Associate Commissioner and Chief Academic Officer. Next slide, please. We have published a lot of data. We're the oldest partner with Credential Engine. Our work goes back to when Credential Engine was created as a nonprofit organization. So at this point, we have published all of the credentials from our public colleges and universities. So all 2- and 4-year campuses, all certificate programs and degree programs, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, some 3,000 plus credentials just from the public post-secondary sector. We do have a few private nonprofit institutions that are on the registry. Now that our phase 1 work on the NSF grant is coming to closure, we'd like to approach them again and see if we can't get more of those private institutions on the registry as well. That's an important priority. You can see a familiar slide there. This is similar to the one that Scott showed earlier. This one happens to be for the Ivy Tech Associate of Science degree in nursing. And we are, while we have all the credentials on the registry, we are continuing to publish more information about those credentials. So for example, we now have all of the competencies associated with Ivy Tech, all associate degrees in all fields on the registry. And we are publishing credentials for new programs once they're approved by the commission, and we're in the process of backfilling to get competencies on the registry for all 3,000 plus of our public certificate and degree programs. Next slide, please. We have a number of use cases. I'll review 2 of them today. This first one is for publishing information about post-secondary degrees, typically certificates, but even in some cases associate degrees that are available through our dual credit initiative at high schools. So we started with those early college programs that have been endorsed by a center, cell at the University of Indianapolis in partnership with the commission. This center has close ties to all of the high schools across the state, and with CEL, the commission has developed a pretty high bar for having early college programs endorsed. There needs to be strong academic and student support services available at those high schools. And in addition to that, there has to be at least one post-secondary credential that can be completed there. In most cases, there are many more than one. So we are in the process of building out the high school representation, the dual credit programs on the registry, but we're very excited about this new use case. And this probably is a good place for me to express my delight that MEC is now, as an organization, is now a partner in Credential Engine's work. And with MEC's strong convening tradition and capabilities, it allows states to work together. So I know, for example, Marcia and I have discussed working together to publish information about high schools, and this is a good way in which states can collaborate and learn from one another. Next slide, please. In the second use case is a familiar one, the eligible training provider list. This is very important to us. Some of the credentials that are on that list are already in the registry. Those from Ivy Tech and Vincennes University are 2-year institutions, but there are many other training providers, some non-traditional, that need to be represented in the registry. We have a strong partnership with our Department of Workforce Development. They are committed to that ETPL on the registry. And in fact, by this time, perhaps, had it not been for COVID-19, they may have already published all of those programs. Currently, that's on hold because of all of the work that they need to do with respect to unemployed Hoosiers. But in any case, we are on track to accomplish that. And in fact, working with our Department of Workforce Development partners and Credential Engine, we've developed a guidebook that can help perhaps other states who want to publish their ETPL. Next slide, please. One of the first things we did in partnership with Credential Engine is to develop a widget which allows Indiana programs to be the sole focus of one's exploration of the registry, and it also enables us to provide links to other information that we have previously developed and that needs to be on the registry to help students understand the kind of choices and transfer, in this case, capabilities that they have. So we have a lot of transfer information that we have fully accessible on our Commission's Transfer In Net site, and this is now linked to the information in the registry. Next slide, please. So the previous slide was an example of how the registry can take advantage of previously existing initiatives and how that can be integrated. This slide speaks to new initiatives that are under development. And Scott, I believe, mentioned this before. Google had approached us at the Commission to find out how information on Indiana community college level programs could be included in their Google Pathways app. And we were happy to point them to the registry in partnership with the Credential Engine. And Indiana was one of the first 3 initial pilot sites for this Google Pathways app. And we look forward to working with them in the future. But it also illustrates how the registry can help in the development in new apps, and that's important, an important way to maximize accessibility to all of the wonderful information and linkages that are in the registry. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to end, but I did want to, here's my contact information, but I also wanted to point out Jillian Schulten's contact information as well. Jillian has been one of the reasons why Indiana has made a lot of progress in publishing data to the registry. And while I would welcome your questions, I would also say don't hesitate to reach out to Jillian as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Now we're going to take questions from our audience. Please feel free to write out some questions in the chat box, in the question box. I know we've got some that we can get started with. This is a question for you, Scott, you and Jeff. Who is involved in publishing credentials to the registry?
Yeah, thank you for that. So it varies quite a bit by who the partner is, and in particular, if we're talking about states, it varies state by state. Increasingly, we've been working with state agencies. So Ken's agency, the Commission on Higher Education in Indiana, the Department of Higher Education in Ohio, the Board of Regents in Kansas, which is 3 good examples about state agencies that have taken the lead in publishing on behalf of their institutions the data that they've already been collecting for various oversight and review requirements in the state. And in each of those cases, we set up a process where the individual institutions can augment or add to the data to enrich the information about those offerings that would be data points that they may not have had to send to the state previously. So it really comes down to a partnership between the state and the individual institutions. And in the cases of licensing bodies, they would be doing that directly. Certification organizations, apprenticeships typically publish on their own.
Great, thank you. If any of our audience members have some additional questions about that, pop them into the chat box. So here's another one we've got. What are the immediate benefits of credential transparency for universities and colleges?
Jeff, I'll let you and actually Ken be able to take that one.
Yeah, sure. Actually, my background is I used to work at a university that was interested in helping communicate its offerings to local employers in a more explicit way, and the value, especially around competencies. And so, for me, I think one of the immediate benefits is to help an institution understand its own differentiation, the benefit that it's providing to the public through its offerings. And invariably, I'll say also, assembling these data often help an institution reflect on their own data governance practices. Maybe they actually don't have at this point a strong handle on what are all the competencies of our offerings. Where are those data stored? How are they updated? Who has authority over sharing those data publicly? And so those are good, healthy, opportunities for an institution to improve in a kind of a non-fire drill kind of way, so that if there is a potential opportunity in the future, that institution could act much more quickly when new offerings might need to be created in response to an emerging credentialing field, that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of direct and indirect benefits of publishing. Ken, did you have any other?
I'll just jump in. Well, I just said, thanks, Jeff, and I certainly agree with everything that Jeff has said. I'll just mention a couple of others. But Jeff did talk about the competencies, and if we want a close alignment between the competencies cultivated in our post-secondary programs and those sought by employers, you can't have a rich dialogue without being clear about the competencies that graduates of particular programs are supposed to master. And by collecting these and publishing them, making them public in an easily searchable way, provides a foundation to build, to have and engage in that type of dialogue, which is so critical. I would also mention that there are important linkages that otherwise would not be readily available. So the linkages between programs and industry and professional certifications, which in some cases are really critical to graduates being hired, and it's important for them to know in the hiring process. I'm going to go back to one of the use cases that I showed, which was the one dealing with dual credit opportunities at high schools. In Indiana, we have one of the largest dual credit programs in the Midwest. We have a lot of good information on teacher qualifications. We spend a lot of time working with dual credit coordinators, etc. But yet, despite all of that effort and tracking students and see how successful they are, there is nowhere in the state currently where you can get a comprehensive full list of every post-secondary credential that is available through dual credit at one of our 400 high schools. We simply, that is not available. The registry will provide a means by which that data can be organized and made transparent and available to any stakeholder, be it a principal, a superintendent, a community leader, a counselor, advisor, or anybody.
That's great. That's really exciting. All right, I'm looking, I think we have time for one more question. How does this work relate to student records?
Ken, do you want to talk about the parchment work in Indiana?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is a good question and a really important one. So one of the things, we have a very mature e-transcript initiative in the state, fully developed at the high school to college level. We are also in the process of implementing that college to college. The big breakthrough there was having our statewide community college system, Ivy Tech, license the parchment software. So one of the products that they have licensed is what is called Parchment Award, which is a digital credentialing service. And the key thing there is that that award service, that digital credential, the representation of the diploma, includes a navigation link to the registry. So, for example, if someone who graduates with an Ivy Tech associate degree, and they send that credential to an employer that has a job opening, that employer can not only verify the fact that that student earned that associate degree from Ivy Tech, but that employer, that HR person, has full access through a navigation link to all of the information about that particular program and Ivy Tech and all of the accreditations and quality assurance information about that program and the college through the registry. So we're really excited about that. This is actually a new development. This is now something that is just available to Ivy Tech students who graduated this past academic year. But needless to say, we would like to build out that capability throughout our post-secondary system.
And Jenny,
Wow.
can I just quickly close out? I know we're at time, but just remind people that there is a growing interest and a number of emerging pilots around the country around interoperable learning records. And you'll see the requirement, the language related to publishing information, credentials, and competencies in open schema as linked data for that purpose. And I think you're going to see much more of that. We're also working with a company called Merit, which does similar things. And we're beginning to look at working with a company called Greenlight, which is very active in the Dallas area, working with the Dallas Independent School District, the community colleges, and University of North Texas, who do the same thing in Dallas. So this is a growing area of interest, and I think institutions and state systems are going to need to make sure they're ready to be compliant with it.
Well, that is a wonderful conclusion. I will let our audience know that MHEC is working in that area of interoperable data and comprehensive learner records, and so be looking for some more of that to come forward pretty soon. I do want to thank you all for being here and draw your attention to the fact that we will be doing a second set of webinars next week. They will not duplicate the information of this week. They will touch on it and then expand upon it. So if you think you can join us, please try to do so. Those webinars will be called Technology Services for a Connected Learn and Work Ecosystem, Results from the Midwestern Credential Transparency Survey. And just as a reminder, you will get a recording of this webinar today, as well as a survey where you can let us know how we did. So I wish you all a great day, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you.